Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyett, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. This episode of Hey Amarillo is supported by the Shops at Wolfland Square, which is celebrating 60 years and 4 generations of local ownership and management. Wolfland Square itself is a shopping center where most of the tenants are local. In fact, you've heard several of those entrepreneurs interviewed on this podcast. These shops attract thousands of shoppers every day, especially during the Christmas season. Management works really hard to make sure each tenant succeeds. They offer free social media marketing for all tenants and a regular schedule of community events. You can learn more by visiting wolflandsquare.com or visit any of the shops at Wolfland Square. Today's guest is Ben Parks. Ben is a retired locomotive engineer with BNSF Railway. And since 2018, he's been the founder of American Cowboy Radio. Now, this company streams cowboy music 24 hours a day, 7 days a week online, and also on FM radio stations in Guthrie, Texas, which you may know as being the headquarters of the Four Sixes Ranch, in Pecos, Texas, places where actual cowboys are living and working. And before the railroad job and before the cowboy radio job, Ben spent part of the 1980s and most of the 1990s with the Amarillo institution Char-Kel, which my generation knows for its delicious cheese fritters. I still crave those like 3 decades later. And I'll be honest, I didn't know about the Char-Kel thing. When I asked Ben to be on the podcast, I thought we were just going to talk about cowboy radio. I didn't know about it, and you'll hear how excited it made me when it came to light in our conversation. So anyway, here's Ben Parks. Ben Parks, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah,
Jason.
I'm honored to have you. I know a little bit about your career, but not enough. And so I want to start with you the same way I start with all my guests. And that's just to ask you, what brought you to the Amarillo area in the first place?
Birth. I was born Northwest Texas Hospital in 1957.
Okay. The old Northwest Texas Hospital then?
The real one, yes. The old one. And lived here with the exception of 2 stints away. I've lived here my whole life. Had the opportunity several years ago to see what life was like on the other side of the mountain and really enjoyed those opportunities. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So,
do you know what brought your family to this area?
The Depression.
Really?
The Dust Bowl days.
Okay.
Dad was in the back of a Model T Ford, headed for California like the rest of the folks out of Arkansas in mid-1930s, and heard there was work in Borger, Texas, and they diverted to Borger, and he never made it to California and never got back to the Ozarks.
I mean, the Dust Bowl was just as bad here as he would have found in Oklahoma or anywhere else.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad they stopped around.
Yeah, Mom, her family, they were originally East Texas, and then as she was born, I believe in Albany, Texas, they again, the oil patch drew them up here. And my granddad was born in 1884, and I remember him quite well. And he was hired by Phillips Petroleum, but they wouldn't give him retirement benefits because he was too old when they hired him.
Wow.
And imagine that in today's circles.
I can't imagine that. Where did you go to school here?
Went to Palo Duro.
Okay.
Came up through Pleasant Valley, Emerson, Horace Mann, and Palo Duro. Graduated in a slash. I was scheduled for 1975 and did summer school 2 years in a row and got out in 74. In fact, the first summer school graduating class out of Amarillo High in 1974, I was in it. Went across in spring of 74 with a blank diploma holder. Non-emotionally, non-ceremoniously, went into the office at Palo Duro later that summer, and they just handed me my diploma across the desk. But there was motivation there. The young lady that had my eye, when everybody else was going across the stage getting their diploma, we got married.
All right.
And we'll wrap up 50 years this coming May.
Okay. Congratulations. So like right after high school? Is
About a year.
Okay.
About 9 months to a year. Got a good paying job and always been out knocking doors and meeting people, and had a job that allowed me to propose and start our family, start our
Well,
life.
tell me about that career path, because I know what you're doing now is very different from what you did in the rest of your career. So, like, what did that look like back then?
Well, it was jobs of opportunity. I'd hear there was something. In fact, the job I started with was selling and servicing fire extinguishers across the Texas Panhandle, and so I got to see anything and everything that was being done across the Panhandle at 18 years old. I was in operating rooms and on oil drilling decks, so got to see people, meet people, and that never really opened up real doors for me, but it was good. Got to experience a lot. And then went into livestock sales, and when you're selling hog and cattle feed in Potter and Randall County, it's hard to make a living. So did that for about 18 months, and then went to work as a machinist at Bell Helicopter, the original Bell Helicopter, and made little parts for the Hueys and the Cobras that they were building and working on. And I believe it's the 206 Jet Ranger used to make the skid tubes for that. And then decided to try a little hand in real estate. Sold real estate for 4 years in the early 80s, and something that I've not publicly talked about before, and so you have a scoop on this.
I'm here for it.
1984, a friend of mine had just purchased he bought it in 1982, but the last house that I closed on and sold was his. Then I went to work for him in 1984 as his night and weekend manager at a little operation called Charkel Drive-In.
Okay.
Is that a scoop?
So I'm of the generation, went to Tascosa High School, graduated in 1992. Charkel was like, the one on Georgia. That was our place.
The original, yes, sir.
Where you could get 99-cent cheese fritters,
50-cent drinks.
I and every other high school student was there on a weekly basis.
Now, I don't mean to embarrass you on this. There was in about 94, so you said 92?
92 is when I graduated.
Okay, you're safe then, because in 94, some boys left a empty vodka bottle out on the parking lot. But being the generous person that I am, I saved it for a week. Next time they came through,
Did you really?
I handed it back to them and said, I think you guys left this here last week.
Did they take it? And
they took it real sheepishly, but I had fun. I enjoyed the interaction with the customers. I miss that. I miss the employees. I miss a lot of factors of that. When you open Facebook and they say, "What do you remember about Amarillo?" I'll guarantee you we're going to come up.
Top, yeah.
We had about 200 responses to one last week, and I've run under the radar a little bit until coming out of the burger closet today with you. I haven't really publicly talked about it because I'm still holding a lot of that and a lot of the recipes and things close to my chest. I do know the exact virtually day history of the whole operation, so it's interesting seeing the speculation that people put on Facebook and the inaccuracies.
There's a lot of nostalgia connected to it.
There really is. We were an institution.
One of my favorite things that I've discovered, and we could probably argue about this, but that Furby's downtown makes a very close approximation of that cheese fritter.
They do.
It's probably not exactly the same, and you could probably tell me how and why, but like when you haven't had one in 25 years, like that's the thing.
It's close enough to bring back the memories. And
what happened with Charkel? I mean, what can you tell me about its history and why it's no longer around?
Well, history. Hunter Puckett, who is a grandson, if I understand the genealogy right, of Wolflin, Charles Wolflin.
I think that's true.
He built it as you and I would build a model railroad. He had other interests, but the stationery and supplies and things that I saw, the discussions I've had, he ran it just pristine. But it was a hobby for him. After the lunch run, he'd slip on his coveralls, go out in the yard and garden and plant his flowers, water his flowers, and salesman would come in and treat him like he's hired hand out in the field there and wanted to talk to the owner, and then he'd say, "Wait a minute, I'll get him for you." And
Yeah.
he had a lot of fun. I never got to meet him. He passed in a plane crash in about 1982.
Okay.
Ran out of gas and landed his plane on the golf course out in outside of Pampa.
Wow.
Restaurant stood dormant for several weeks, maybe a couple of 3 months, and a guy named Ray Black, his family's well known here in Amarillo. He was in the car business. Ray bought it from Hunter's Estate
Okay.
and bought everything you saw and the operation and the recipes and everything. He didn't buy the land. It was held on to by the Wolfland Family Trust at the time, and so he didn't have the land. He operated for a couple or 3 years, and my friend John bought it from him, and then I went to work there in the mid-'80s.
Okay.
And getting into kind of the leading question you had there, what happened and why. In 1990, my friend John, we built the second location over here on 34th and Atkinson, where the old Latex Oil Company car wash and gas station was. And beautiful building, beautiful lawn. And I managed both of them back and forth. And then John decided in about end of 1989 that he wanted to split them up and gave me the opportunity to buy the original location, and he kept running the 34th Street location. And so ran that from 1990 through 1999 through 2 or 3 different leases with the Wolfland family, and then it morphed over to the Wolfland Mortgage Company. And we struggled. In 1995 or 6, we had street construction down the middle of Georgia.
Yeah.
And it was ugly. And it was my sole source of income, so it was a very, very much struggle. Thankfully, to some suppliers and the grace of God, we survived. And time was rolling on. The last lease had a couple of years left on it, and I knew the environment that I was dealing with, and that it was probably not likely that I would have the opportunity to buy the land or renew the lease.
Okay.
And so I started shopping for things I'd like to do. Probably the first time in my life that I picked a career rather than stumbling into one.
Okay.
And I got on with BNSF Railway as a trainee and then conductor and then engineer. Over a 25-and-a-half-year period, went into management. Back to my life in Amarillo, I left here, like I said, I wanted to see the other side of the mountain and live near the water, and I was as far away from Amarillo in the BNSF system that you can get and still be in the United States at Everett, Washington.
Okay.
And be careful what you ask for, because the elevation of the yard we were in, the railroad yard there, was 4 feet above sea level. But I loved it. I love the people. We still go back every year for a little event that I do up on Whidbey Island. But so I got onto the railroad, and as I anticipated, the lease came to an expiration. We rolled over to a month-to-month rental setup per the lease. And the lease that I was presented, and I want to preface things here, I have absolutely no sour grapes to gripe about or cry about. Business is business, and I thoroughly understood when I went into the contract what I was doing, or what you always hope for the best, but I planned for the worst.
Right.
And so the lease expired. The new lease was presented to me, and it had a lot of fine print and provisions that I didn't want to harness myself to. Financially, we could have done it, but there was some very fine print there that was not to my benefit. So the third week of September 1999, we politely handed a half-page notice to our customers that said it's been real and it's been fun. We've appreciated being here, but this will be our last week in operation. And Jason, I anticipated by the end of the week, Thursday or so, we'd be turning the lights off and mopping the floor and going home. Word got out.
Yeah.
One of my customers lady that I went to high school with, she was associated with the Globe News. She made a call to the newsroom. They ran an article on Tuesday or Wednesday. By Thursday and Friday, news stations were out filming live remotes at lunch and at dinner time. I cut back my food order on that first Monday, thinking, well,
Yeah, you didn't want to have stuff left.
Don't need $1,000 worth of hamburger patties. And by Tuesday evening, I was in a bind and having to call and get additional supplies.
Wow.
We kept good records. On Friday, we broke every record we'd ever kept. And I don't know if you remember, on Saturdays we ran dollar hamburgers.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody asked me, "Are you going to do that since it's your last weekend? Are you going to price gouge us or anything?" I said, "I run my business as the business is established. I don't do that. That's not my way of doing things." We still broke every record again on Saturday. The outpouring of the community. We had people telling us they'd been in line for 2 hours.
Yeah.
They were lined up down past, where Walgreens is now. They were lined up across 26th Street, and people buying 4 or 5 hamburgers to take home and stick in the freezer.
Yeah.
Just the outpouring. You mentioned Tascosa. We had some kids just, well, can we hold a car wash for you? Because a car wash or a bake sale in their mind
that's their
solves
solution.
every problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think about Charkel all the time because it was such a major part of my high school experience. The same way that the music you listen to in high school becomes the music that you love the rest of your life. And I think, what if Charkel had survived? Because we're in a period now where people really value locally owned businesses, especially restaurants. People are very serious about their cherry limeades from HUD's or from Sonic or wherever they get it. It feels like all the pieces are in place that, like, this would be a moment for Charkel, a place like that. It's drive-through, it's small, it's locally owned. It's just got all this excitement attached to it.
I still have dreams about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. In fact, the week after we closed, we took a week, the last week of September, and we spread out our equipment, sold some. We didn't own the refrigeration stuff. It's refrigeration equipment. You're better off leasing than owning ice machines and such. But we dispersed all of the equipment, and I left the building absolutely spick and span, totally void of any kind of equipment. But you could have eaten off the floor because, a lot of people would leave a mess and say, let the new people take care of it. And I treat things the way I want to be treated. And that's the way I've always lived my life with my employees then, my employees at the railroad, with the people I do business with now in my current endeavor. I treat people the way I want to be treated, and it's not a hard thing to live by. But I've wondered, what would we do, especially with the new innovations, the electronic. See, we're talking 1999. Very few places took credit cards.
Yeah.
It was all cash and check. And I built a database from the checks that people wrote me. I'd send out coupons and thank yous and just neighborhood marketing. I didn't have the money to go up against Sonic or Burger King or anybody else, but I knew how to take care of my customers, everybody that I could get on my roof and see. That was my clientele group. And we could open tomorrow and not have a word of advertising. And
I feel like it would make a big splash.
The irony to it is, I think I could make 3 phone calls and get a staff of former employees.
You would have a bunch of 50-year-olds like me just showing up ready to.
Hey, can I make a fritter? Yeah, let's go.
Yep.
And the week after we were completely finished, I got a phone call. This guy said, "Ben, you don't know me, but you know my wife. I won't name her name because she's prominent here." He said, "I do not like for her to be unhappy, and she's very unhappy with the way this thing took place. And we've talked about it, and we would like to offer you a loan to reestablish your business. We're not wanting to be partners. We don't want a big percentage. We don't want anything but simple interest. We know you. We know how you run a business, and we want to help you. Oh, you talk about something that scared you to death. I knew the bread basket that I had at the railroad was a good one.
Yeah, you already had that job in
I
place.
had the job for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And my wife and my son, they had taken over whenever I went into railroad training and working out of town, and they took over. And it's all my son had ever done. Now, don't get me wrong, because I had people tell me when we'd leave him a stack of blank signed checks and we'd go out of town for a week, and I had people that would look over his shoulder anonymously and they'd tell me, you need to leave more because he runs this business better than you do. and I'm very thankful he does. And he's that kind of man. He's well respected. He's also at the railroad and a leader in his peer group. But I decided that, as lucrative as that sounded, I wasn't going to strap him into, a family-owned business. You grow up in the family.
Sure.
I didn't want to mandate that on him. And today, when he thinks about what it could be doing, he's not too happy with me.
Well, but 1999, the next year was a big financial crisis. That might have knocked you down too.
Yep.
And so I think about, and I've heard stories about business transitions and career changes and things like that. I think there's something to be said for just knowing that something's coming to an end and ending it and moving on to the next thing. I think a lot of businesses try to hold on for too long.
Right.
And then they, the memories that we have of Charkel may not have been as great because the service declined or the food declined or something happened like that. And so the fact that you went out on your terms and just said, okay, this is over, like that kind of worked.
Did you see Breaking Bad?
Yes.
You remember what happened to Jesse in the dungeon in the chain?
Yes.
That's one of my greatest fears, is somebody chains me to a fryer in a dungeon and I have to make cheese fritters the rest of my life. So if I come up missing...
well, you know that you're here in my basement, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the railroad career, and I know that was a big chunk of time. And we can talk about that if you want to. One of the things, though, that I wanted to hear from you is your final or most recent career change, which was after retiring from the railroad, getting into American Cowboy Radio.
We'll go down the railroad track for just a minute.
Okay, let's go down that track for a moment and then walk me through the rest of it.
I really enjoyed the career. It's very lucrative. There's a trade-off for that, though, because it's the time you have is what they're buying. The work is not laborious. It's intense, but you're getting paid an inconvenience fee for the phone ringing at 2:00 in the morning, telling you to be at work at 3:30. It doesn't matter whether it's Christmas or New Year's or your son's birthday.
Okay.
You go and you get on your train and you go to Kansas or New Mexico or Colorado, wherever your run happens to take you. But we adjusted to that well. And my son married a girl whose father had been a fireman. And so he's had no problem with the transaction. We all understand that Christmas is not on December 25th. It's whenever all of your hearts get together and you celebrate.
Yeah.
And so the transition there has not been bad. I'm blessed that I got to go into management to see the world. I'm about 3 years outside of Seattle, Everett, Washington, ran the railroad yard operations there. Went from there to Kansas City. At Kansas City, I supervised about 300 locomotive engineers working from Kansas City back towards Wichita and Wellington, Kansas. So all those times, you have to hold people to task, but there's a way to treat people. And I've had so many employees tell me they wish I'd come back there too.
Did leaving Amarillo to live in Everett, Washington, or go places like that, did it make you view this area in a different way? Because, that's a very different, not just environments, mountains and ocean and stuff like that. It's a different culture, different mindset.
And I'm adaptable to it, and I've made friends. The culture is different. But what I really feel is people are people. And if you approach them from that aspect, sure, there's some crazies. I'd be naive to say there weren't.
We've got them here, though.
We've got them here. But it gave me, when you grow up in a location, you learn and you build your lifestyle around what your dad did, who your dad knew, where you went to school, your school friends open a garage or start work for a cable company or whatever. That's your social and business contacts. I wanted to see what it's like to totally reestablish myself in a foreign land.
Interesting.
And I think I succeeded at it. I bought a house in both locations. And the takeaway from both of those experiences was, I'm glad I'm in Amarillo. As I said, I love it up there. We love Kansas City. We love the Seattle area. But there are things here that you take for granted that when you go elsewhere, standing in line, you're going to stand in line, whether it's a restaurant or going to Sam's or Costco. You're going to stand in line, whether to get in, to get out, to get your car washed, whatever, go to Albertsons or to go to the grocery store. And nowhere does anybody carry your groceries to the car except for United Grocery Store. And I compliment them. When I see something, I like to give credit and give compliment. I'll tell the stalkers and the guy carrying the bags out, you don't realize how special this service you provide is. And that's one of the things when I would come back home. My wife stayed here. We kept our home here.
Okay.
And I went up and lived. She had two things to say. She was very supportive of me going, but she said, don't change right when you can, and don't change the direct deposit. So, but we very strong relationship. Like I said, we're closing out 50 years in 6 months. I'd come home, and it would amaze me. I'd fly in, and we'd get in the car and come down I-40 and pull up at I-40 and bail at the stoplight and see somebody run the light because they didn't want to wait 30 seconds. It's like you'd never make it in a big city.
And you have no idea.
People, even with the construction, and we'll get into that, but even with the construction and things, you can get around in Amarillo. Was
your intention to retire back to Amarillo from the railroad?
It all worked out well. I was on my last 3 years, I was on a traveling team that did safety inspections, and the economy and other internal politics caused them to disband the team I was on. And so I got a letter to be in Amarillo, and they gave me the option of taking a severance package or going back to the best job I ever had. And so for another 6 years, I ran every kind of freight train you can imagine between here and Wellington, Kansas, including circus trains, officer specials with the president of the railroad on it, everybody but Warren Buffett I've hauled around, and 3 mile long freight trains. So, very safe, very successful career. But I saw so many people who were approaching retirement that were scared to retire. There are people out there that have been able to retire for 15 years, but they don't have anything else to do. And I didn't want to be one of those people. First of all, financially, it makes no sense to give them back your retirement every year until you've earned it again. And so literally the day I was eligible to retire, I took my retirement. But 2 years prior to that, I'm a planner, I'm a thinker, I look ahead. And there's a lot more to it. We'll get into that in just a minute. I know I'm being windy. But I was able to start the enterprise American Cowboy Radio and build from the ground up a radio station whose vision is to preserve and promote the American cowboy way of life through its music, stories, and poetry on air and online in a clean, family-friendly format, the cowboy way. That's my vision statement. And I've lived up to that, and we're 6 years into that. So
tell me how that happened. So what prompted the idea?
I'm not a cowboy. I grew up around it. I have a dear uncle was a cowboy, a real cowboy, not a Yellowstone cowboy, a real cowboy, and He was on ranches around here, the Bivens Coldwater, the LX, some others, and finished his life out in eastern New Mexico around Elida, and very well respected. And I got to spend some time on ranches. I've been to brandings. I've smelled burning hide, and I know what it takes to get a calf to market. But I'm not a cowboy, and I'm not an entertainer. I'm not a singer, performer. There's probably a law somewhere that says I can't even carry a guitar case. I'm not sure, but I grew up around the music with an affection for it. First Western style song I remember is the old Wagon Wheels, the old song Wagon Wheels with Sons of the Pioneers.
Okay.
I had an affinity for that lifestyle, that culture, and got acquainted with Red Stegall, local boy that's done well in the music industry, in the Western industry. He's from Sanford. Followed his career and his music along, and then I found a radio station outside of Watsonville or San Luis Obispo, California, an online station called Cowboy Cultural Society.
All right.
And a lady had formed that because she, much like me, she wasn't a cowgirl, but she loved the lifestyle and what it means. And she built that radio station and introduced me. I'm a victim of Top 40, KIXC, KBUY, KDJW, all these KPUR, Charlie Broomhead and I. We used to play miniature golf out at Wonderland for a quarter a hole. And I worked at Wonderland. That's where I met my wife. And so I listened to the station, Cowboy Cultural Society, and then it went off the air, and I found out the lady that had formed it had passed away. I've got a good friend since the early 80s that's a broadcast engineer, radio technician, consultant, horse trades in radio station building permits and station licenses. And he and I had talked about replicating what she was doing, just a streaming page with my meager library of cowboy music. And we were kicking around, as I do. I plan and I think and I look for the nuts and bolts in things and try to get them in a row, the ducks in a row, before I take a deep breath and say, let's do it. And that's what we were doing. And then he and I were having lunch, and we'll discuss my favorite restaurant in a little while, and that's where we were. But he popped off and said, I've got a construction permit to build a radio station in Guthrie, Texas. He said, there's nothing here. We're just going to have nothing there. We're just going to have to let it expire. And I mean, light bulbs, whatever you want to call it, lightning bolts, light bulbs, ideas ran through my mind right then. I said, well, what'll it take to get it off the ground? He said, why would you want it? There's nothing there. As I found out later, King County, Guthrie, Texas, population in 2000 was 377 people. The county.
The county, not Guthrie itself.
The county. Way more horses and cows. It's the home of the 4-6s, the Tongue River, the Pitchfork, and other ranches.
I mean, it's legendary for the ranches surrounding Guthrie,
Absolutely.
but Guthrie itself is not a lot.
And I've learned that that's the second least populated county in Texas at the time, and the third least in the United States.
Wow.
So there's no the only revenue business that the public can walk into in King County virtually is the 4-6's Supply House, which is a gas station, convenience store, souvenir shop for the 4-6's ranch enterprise.
Okay.
And but he said, why would you want it? And I said, well, we've been kicking around the idea of a cowboy streaming page. There'd be nowhere better to say you were playing on the radio than Guthrie, Texas. Nowhere better to be authentic. You're playing cowboy music for authentic cowboys. Not the drugstore kind, again, not the Yellowstone kind, but real cowboys. And as it's proven, it's beyond my comprehension how well I've been received in that community.
The timing of it strikes me too. And you mentioned the Yellowstone connection. This was 6 years ago. In the years since, Taylor Sheridan, who's behind Yellowstone, has become one of the owners of the 4-6s.
Yes.
Now they're filming there. There's series on, in the works, and you actually have Yellowstone cowboys and real cowboys in the same place, and a lot more attention has come to Guthrie than when you started.
It has, and We've done some projects there. In fact, Mr. Sheridan signed off on a couple of things that I wanted to do there. So we came on the air they have a big horse sale every year, Return to the Remuda Horse Sale. Several ranches get together. They'll have 1,000 people show up out there at their outdoor covered arena to buy these horses, and they'll sell for anywhere from $3,000 to a gelding this 8 weeks ago. Gelding, which has no residual value. My listeners
they're not going to breed.
There's nothing other than riding that horse you're going to get out of it. Sold for $220,000.
Wow.
And that's like having a Lamborghini going 90 miles an hour down a dead-end dirt road.
Mm-hmm.
But we came on the air on October the 4th, 2018.
Okay.
Been on the air 6 years now. And well received. My vision is the international listener, the worldwide listener on the internet. But to authenticate that, to be able to say we're playing in Guthrie, Texas,
you're actually playing over the airwaves.
and it's flabbergasted me. I stepped off an elevator. I got to go to the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada. I think it was 2021. And a fellow stepped on the elevator as I was stepping off at my hotel. And he had on a vest with the Tongue River Ranch logo embroidered on it. I said, "You're a long way from the Tongue River." He said, "You know the ranch?" I said, "Well, I stayed in their bunkhouse about 6 weeks ago." And he said, "I just filmed a movie out there." His name was Bud Force. He filmed The Cowboys, a documentary. It's available on Netflix.
Okay.
And he's the real deal. And those ranches, that movie documented about 6 or 8 ranches across the western United States that still cowboy the old-fashioned way, go out in the wagons. But it's the purpose of that comment was it's amazed me at how well known that one moment of why would you want a radio station there
Right.
has proven itself almost weekly. It's just amazing. So I'm very blessed that I had that opportunity. I'm the newest property owner in King County.
Okay.
I bought the former post office building. It's a shell of a building, but it's historical. Right when you're standing on the supply house's porch, you look about 1,500 feet due east. There's this yellow and green roofed building there, and I'll eventually put a remote studio there.
Okay.
I do everything out of my studio here in Amarillo, but as I say, I've got a footprint in the county, well received, and participate in anything. I tell them this radio station is yours, well, for whatever you need it or want it for. So,
And yet you're still based in Amarillo.
based in Amarillo.
And I want to close this section just by giving you a chance to tell why. Like, why was Amarillo sort of your return destination? Why has it remained where you live and work, despite like having a business that does have that connection to Guthrie?
You're too young to understand this next statement, but there's a thing called grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And I love my grandchildren. My wife loves our grandchildren, and they're here, so we're here. But Amarillo is a good place to be. It's centrally located. You can go where you want to go from here easily.
You know that because you've led trains from here back to here.
Travel a lot, go to Western music shows, and just it's where we want to be. We kind of closing out the railroad ideology there. So many of those people that I saw that stayed on after they achieved retirement age, when they retire, 2 years later, they're dead. And I'm a year and a half out, and I don't plan on being dead in 6 months. I wanted something to keep me busy, something to do. So we broke ground 2 years ago on my studio building, and for what it is, it's a little state-of-the-art haven. I've got a 40-foot commute now.
Yeah.
And so it's a neat setup, and I'm very, very glad to have a place to. I was in my wife's living room, and that didn't work out too well.
I understand that. It's good to have a place of your own.
Absolutely.
Hey Amarillo is supported this week by Pestex Pest Control. Ben with Pestex sprays my house every few months. He was just here a couple of weeks ago. I use Pestex because they're locally owned. They use pet-friendly products, and most importantly, they don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. Ben will come to my door. He asks if I've seen anything he needs to work on or address, like mice around the woodpile or spiders showing up indoors, and I'll be like, yes, the members of this household are going to need you to address the spider thing. And then he goes to it. He evaluates every customer's pest problem and finds the best way to solve it. So to get in touch, call or text 806-433-8841 or look up PestTex on Facebook or Instagram. Okay, I'm back with Ben Parks. Ben, this is the part of the show I call 8 Straight. 8 Straight is sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon. It's the largest history museum in Texas, and its collection includes dozens and dozens of saddles used by Texas Panhandle cowboys over the past 2 centuries, including a silver-mounted saddle made around 1905, which belonged to Colonel Charles Goodnight. Those are not always on display, but I have seen the archives full of saddles, and it's a fascinating place.
There's a wealth of resources there.
So many interesting things there. So you can see some of that, learn more at panhandleplains.org. Okay, when you think of Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
Hope the highway construction's done.
You and everybody else.
There'll be some new ideas there. It's twofold, and it actually fills in a question down deeper in your comments here. I hope for more sustainable employment. I hope for that to come possibly through the aviation industry. I don't want to say this because we've got some very progressive leadership right now, but there's an attitude in Amarillo. We've got one, why do we need another one? Such as Aircraft Company. When we built the second Charkel, the man from the SBA loan company said, well, you've got a going operation. Why would you want another one?
Yeah.
And that mentality keeps Amarillo in check. I believe we have a great opportunity. The master plan for the Amarillo International Airport, Rick Husband, the master plan has parallel runways. And there's no reason for somebody like FedEx or UPS, if they need to expand their operations, there's no reason for them not to be in Amarillo, Texas.
Sure.
The nighttime flights that go in and out of Memphis and Louisville, they're just phenomenal. We could do that here in Amarillo. We could
central location. We got a lot of room out there.
But there's a but. Businesses, operations like that, you have to have infrastructure and resources for entertainment, for recreation, and I think we need to see the Rock Rose, see Rock Rose finish, the Kids Inc., additional things like that for those that aren't athletically inclined. We need things for, the people we're trying to attract when they get off work in Memphis or in Louisville, they go down to the river and get their boat out and go fishing. We don't have that here, so that's a drawback to us. But I believe that there's reasons that we could have people here.
Okay, I agree. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
I'm going to open a can of worms. Kind of ties in with that last one. I don't know if they're againers or againsters. Everything that comes up, there's always a opportunity for people to say, well, again, we don't need that. We've got one. Why is the Walmart distribution center in Plainview, Texas, when we're the crossroads of America in Amarillo, Texas?
Yeah.
Because when they approached back in the 80s, back then there was no tax abatement. Well, we don't have to do that. You'll come here anyway because we are the crossroads. Well, look at the hundreds of trucks in and out of Plainview every day. I was disappointed that the Canyon school tax proposal went down when it was so little.
Yeah.
If I recall the presentation I heard, it was going to be like less than $50 a year on a prominent home. And we're against it because we don't want our taxes to go up. Well, maybe they could have done a better job of education for the potential taxpayers so that they could see what they were getting out of it. I think that is one of the biggest handicaps we have here.
I think so. I think it does hold us back. And I'm not sure if education is always a solution when there are a lot of people that are just dug in. It's hard to change minds, and it's a long-term process.
It is.
Like stopping a train, I imagine.
Absolutely.
What does this area not have enough of?
Well, I'm going to tie it back in with what do I think of Amarillo in 10 years? Sustainable employment opportunities. I think we just need the jobs. In my travels, I don't know what it is about the Texas Panhandle that we're so agriculturally focused, but when you get across the border into Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, every little town has a 50 to 100 employee factory, shop, something of some sort that's making something. .coms, they trade dollars. But when you bring in a roll of steel and it goes out as a farm implement or anything, you've created revenue, you've created real money. And we need those sort of things here. We would love to have another Bell helicopter. We would love to have another Pantex. But we need more of the 50 to 100 employee manufacturing jobs, and I'd like to see that.
Okay. What's your favorite local neighborhood?
I'm an old timer. I live in the past a lot. I really like the San Jacinto, the Country Club Terrace, the Country Club neighborhood. I can envision the trolley going out 6th Street to the turnaround there on Broadmoor. And I remember those neighborhoods when the people that lived there had the pride of ownership. I know culture changes and needs change, but those little neighborhoods where everybody knew each other. They were all over Amarillo. Those are the two examples. I grew up just north of the tracks. My territory for running was for riding my bicycle was Buchanan to the west, Arthur to the east, Northeast 8th, and Northeast 3rd. So I had a square mile. That was my territory. Of good people. I like the neighborhoods where people worked hard and lived.
What's your favorite local restaurant?
Well, I'm going to jump in there and say Cafe Marazon.
Okay, yeah.
Again, because of the old history.
For sure.
Beautiful photographs that Scott's put together for documenting Amarillo's history. And let's say that scratch cooking, it's awfully good.
It's good. That's an underrated restaurant. It doesn't
really
get enough attention.
That Texas Philly cheesesteak made with ribeye and jalapenos, it's my go-to there. Sure is.
Okay, what's your favorite local nonprofit?
I got to listen to one of your podcasts, and I'm going to put in Make-A-Wish there, but it's sandwiched in between, and people don't think of it as a nonprofit, but Coffee Memorial Blood.
Yeah.
They are an asset. Of course, they're all over Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle now. But that's a product that if we as volunteers, and that's what predominantly a nonprofit depends on, if we as volunteers don't give our blood, you can't get it at Walmart. Can't. We've never hauled an ounce of blood on the railroad. Maybe. And but I have respect there. I'm a contributor.
As am I.
And hope to, I think I'm just about to knock down 60 donations.
All right.
But the third one behind that, Make-A-Wish, because we participate, the radio station and some other friends participate in the chili cook-off, and to see what happens there is so beneficial. And helping kids, you're giving them life through blood. But if they don't have something to eat, it's a long, long day. And the food bank, I think, is one of our a gem here on the High Plains.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the most underrated aspect of living here?
It's the same thing that most of your listeners talk about, what you want to change. In fact, one of your words up there says other than the wind.
Yeah.
I think the climate. The climate here, we'll have windy days, but we don't have 100% humidity and 90 degrees and try to go outside.
It's absolutely true.
We have the cool evenings, the beautiful sunrises, sunsets, the being able to get out and walk the neighborhoods. I love the mornings here, and I think our climate is back to, everything circles back to those job ideas. The climate here, I believe, is perfect for aviation.
Okay.
Little side note, real quick one, but we've gone out and eaten at the English Field House, the cafe out there by the General Aviation Terminal at International. And 9 times out of 10, that windsock is pointed right down the runway. Now, that airport went in, the original runways went in what, the 30s?
I think
Right
so.
in there.
It's English Field.
How did they know which way to orient that runway for the prevailing winds? Have you put any thought into that?
Well, probably because they lived here and they knew that's the direction the wind always blows.
Well, just go out on the prairie and look at those old trees.
Yeah, see which
They're
way the trees are bent.
They're pointing right
Yep,
down that
they'll tell you.
same heading, and so I just love that idea. And but the climate here, I think, is something. I heard on one of your other podcasts about, and I have the phrase, everybody south of Childress virtually has a story about being snowed in, hailstormed in, dusted in,
Mhm.
stuck in the Amarillo. They don't know, especially people out of the Metroplex, don't know how we can even live up here and sustain life. And maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we don't want them up here. I don't know.
Maybe that's true. That may be true.
But yeah, you'll catch that. But I've been snowed in Denver and Albuquerque, and it happens everywhere. The phrase that if you don't like the weather here, wait 5 minutes and it'll change. That's not unique to Amarillo. That
No.
is a national saying. Every community believes that their weather is unique. But the climate, I love it. The clear skies. When I haven't got to see the recent comet, but when Hale-Bopp comet was going across, and
You
could
just barely have to get out of town to see it.
absolutely.
Okay, last question. We've talked about cowboys. When was the last time you visited the Big Texan?
How long since you had a big, thick, steaming bowl of Wolf Brand chili?
I have not had Wolf Brand chili for probably a decade.
Well, friend, that's too long. And I'm
Okay.
in the same case. I need to get out there. Why don't you and I plan on going out and see Bobby Lee and talking to him?
We need to do
So
it. Probably the last time I was there, I was with Bobby Lee. So
Let's figure on maybe by the early in January. Let's go out there and
I'm sure we can make that work.
have a ribeye.
Okay, so that concludes the 8 straight questions. I like to close by asking my guests to endorse something. So what's one thing you would like listeners to know about or to experience?
The history of Amarillo, the working class history of Amarillo. There's plenty of documentation on the founders, but there's a lot of stuff. Do you know where the post office on Northeast 8th was before they built the one on Martin Road?
No.
Do you know which direction the railroad tracks really run from here, where they go? No. The history, the why the community is called River Road, why it's Pleasant Valley. Those things, they're all over Amarillo. And I enjoy them. I enjoy telling people about them. And that's a little bit of a passion of mine, is getting people and being able to point out, hey, what now is a scare house was a theater on 6th Street. And so just knowing more of the history of Amarillo, why Puckett Place is called Puckett Place.
Exactly, yeah.
All those things, Ridgecrest, why we have 37 and 806 for our phone numbers. All those things just intrigue me. And so learning more about our history is what I encourage people to do.
All right, I can get behind that. Ben Parks, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
It's been a
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you.
And that concludes the episode. Thanks to Ben for the interview. You can listen to American Cowboy Radio at americancowboyradio.com. Thanks also to Pestex Pest Control, the shops at Wolfland Square, and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting this podcast, and to Angelina Marie for editing every week. And thank you for listening. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/HeyAmarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Barbara and Jim Witten, Cindy Graham, Wes Reeves, Josh Wood, Corey Burns, Katie Linger, Jason Burr, and Patrick Burns. This has been episode 381. My name is Jason Boyette, and I'll see you next week.